Jeremy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing all right.
Doing all right.
Yeah.
Good.
And
Listen, you and I got connected because you are speaking up about integrating some level of legalized possession medicinal marijuana in the state of Idaho, either in some form, from some location, in some quantity, for cases where people are, not necessarily vets, but vets are a very common population that are articulated as wanting legalized marijuana. Be it vets or cancer patients or cancer survivors, just people with pain. And you really highlight the irony where it's like, okay, I can get opioids and all kinds of things in a bottle from a doctor. Why is it that we wouldn't have at least some option for this THC essentially, right? Why can't we get something like that? This is a conversation that's really raging throughout the country because we have examples of states that went with medicinal marijuana and then some have moved to recreational marijuana. And so we can see in real time, how these things are flushing out. So help me understand how you got to this point and what your position is.
well, my first position, I joined the military back in 1990 and I retired in 2012. I was a civil engineer and then a first sergeant. And I deployed, I would say a bunch of times, but like 6, 7 different times I deployed to locations. I was even a security forces first sergeant in Iraq for 6 months there and like a month of training prior. So I've worked with police as well. But when I first joined, and then marijuana started becoming legally or legalized medicinally, like California started that in like 1996. And I was young in my career then. And I was just thinking, these are just people that are trying to figure out how to get high legally. And because I was fit, I had nothing wrong with me. I had no physical ailments whatsoever. And then I started hearing that, more and more states were going medicinally up until even when I retired, which was 2012. And still there was not a recreational state in existence yet, but there were dozens of medical marijuana states, or at least more than a dozen. And it was growing. And then Colorado decided, well, then I found out in 2014 that I had had cancer in my system for quite a while, and it was stage 4. And I was only a couple months from dying, it turned out at the time. And I had to have like this quick operation where they opened me up, 13-inch incision, spread it apart, opened me up, lifted my organs actually out to get to all of them so they could scrape them and then scrape out my peritoneal cavity and remove my omentum, remove my spleen, remove my gallbladder. And they even had to remove my belly button because there was cancer in behind that. They had to resect my colon. And then I've had 2 other major surgeries like that since, where they've even taken out more of my bowel. But in all that time, that's when I started having pain. And then I started on chemotherapy. And where it first kind of became like more of attention to me is when some of my folks now at the VA, there's laws that say they cannot, because they're federal doctors, they're actually not allowed to recommend marijuana for you. But it doesn't mean you can't actually have a quick conversation about it. They can only say so much, or there's so much they can't. There's even more they can't say. Right. But it came down to it. Like, I was on chemo. I'm 203 pounds right now. I was 161 pounds after my surgery and on chemo. And I couldn't eat. Everything tasted like metal, tasted like rust. Eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and it tastes like you're licking a rusty pipe. So my wife's like, you need to eat, you need to eat. And so they said, well, we can try these appetite things, but the best thing that would work for you in this case would be like cannabis, because that stimulates your appetite better than anything we could have. But you can't have it because you're in Idaho. And I didn't want to risk going to jail over it, because I do have veterans benefits that, depending on how an arrest of possession would go, I could end up in jail really quick. Or not. It depends on what they would do, but sure. I didn't want to risk that. So I just fought through it. But it took me over a year to gain back 20 pounds. And I had to come off chemo. It ended up being like life-threatening, where I was blacking out. But it turned out that probably wasn't the chemo. It was something else that was interacting with possibly my port or something. But regardless, it was I was having issues. So they just stopped it altogether, and the cancer came back like right away. And so, but I had all this pain too. And I started looking into that, and I got seen specialists outside in states where cannabis was legal, because there's no specialist in Idaho that deals with my cancer. And so I'm in California, and they were like, well, would you like a medical cannabis card so you can use cannabis? And I was like, I would, but I live in Idaho. And they're like, oh yeah, we can't help you there. So that's kind of how it all came about. But I looked into it. I didn't want to just try it. I looked into it. I talked to nurses who were very familiar with prescribing, or, well, you can't prescribe, but recommending medical cannabis and going off recommendations and applying that to patients. And they cleared up a lot of misconceptions I had. And I realized that there are some benefits to it. And some people, especially if they're life-threatening or extreme pain, they should have the choice to not take morphine or Oxycontin or oxycodone or hydrocodone or Demerol or Dilaudid or fentanyl. Those are all more dangerous, but their prescription, they're allowed to be sold or allowed to be prescribed, and we're allowed to use them if the doctors want to manage our pain. But I don't see a reason why people in certain situations couldn't at least have the right to try, but you have to be in a legal state to try.
Man, that's, I understand what you're saying. You know, like, I'm not personally fighting from cancer, but I have very close, you know, relatives and friends of mine that are. And one of the first things that I got introduced to with medicinal marijuana, the argument for it was exactly what you're talking about, which is appetite. And it's something that appears that THC in particular has something that is really successful at, that really doesn't have a parallel. Like, there's no, you know, opioid base that it's like, oh yeah, you'll be super, super hungry. And in fact, I had to broke my nose once a long time ago, and they put me on morphine, and you know, the morphine helped with the pain to re-break the nose, but then of course I started throwing up. So it would be the exact opposite of what you would want for somebody to gain back weight. Did they present any other options though? Like, I'm an idiot. I don't know anything about, I've never been in your situation. I've never had elaborate conversations, but was there anything else that was presented to you? It's like, look, you're in this fight to gain weight that could become life-threatening. Like, try these things, try X, Y, or Z. Or is it really just, there's only one thing that can help you, you can't have it, and we move on from that conversation?
Yeah. In that one, I don't recall them actually giving me something to stimulate my appetite. I don't think I was actually giving something like that, but I was sent to a nutritionalist who could explain, like, maybe some things that I could eat better.
Like ice cream? Like ice cream all day?
Yeah. Well, it turned out that I started having to eat things that were high in, like, spice level, high in like flavors. So ice cream was it. I couldn't drink a lot of things, but I could drink like hot chocolates or something like that, something with a lot of like flavor in it.
Right.
But I was very limited on my diet, and I'm on chemo, so my appetite wasn't being stimulated. I was just trying to eat things that I could get through that metal taste. And I was eating enough to sustain, but it got to a point where they were telling me that, like, you better start eating, you could end up dying. And like I said, my wife, you know, she didn't want me to die. I don't want to die, but it was really hard just to eat food. It was really hard. And I was tempted to go get cannabis at that point. I was too weak to go do it. I mean, when I walked into the VA to do my chemo, I actually didn't walk into the VA. I got dropped off at the front door and was put in a wheelchair and wheeled down there. And then they told me, if you can't walk 200 feet, we're not putting you on chemo. And they made me wait 2 more weeks. And so I had to get to where, when I walked into the front door, because oncology's to the back, so it's maybe an 800-foot walk or something.
Sure.
I had to make that walk in order just to do chemo, so I had to work on it. But I walked, and I kid you not, like a 95-year-old man with problems in a walker. That's how slow I walked through there. And now I can walk. So, but it was rough several months.
You have articulated a position right before we started the mics. You articulated positions that I find unique to this conversation, which is that you don't necessarily, like, you think there should be some level of medicinal possession legal in the state, but you don't necessarily think the state needs to harbor dispensaries, because this is classically, like, we know Long's Drugs, I know CVS, I understand what pharmaceutical, operations look like from a consumer standpoint. I also know what the medicinal and like, recreational marijuana dispensaries look like in California. And they do not look like CVS. Like this is not a controlled or a really, I mean, it's controlled to a degree, but it's not the same kind of exacting operation that you see in, just an average, drugstore. And I would not really love to see those. I mean, I'll make my position clear. Like, I don't like the experience around those things. It's like, this is kind of goofy, like, and I don't have the answers. I don't know what the right thing to do is, but I can just tell you as like a random citizen, it's like, you see them a bunch. Whenever I have to go back to the Bay Area, you see them, they're everywhere. And it's like, you got security guards outside and you got people, stoned out, enhanced to whatever degree you want to say, hanging around there. And it's like, that's like, I don't really want like my 10-year-old rolling around, that area. So again, I've never heard somebody say, hey, look, we should figure out some way to provide this product or this option to people, for instance, in your situation, without the burden of having the dispensaries on every corner. And that's really unique. Like, what does that look like for you?
Well, I did write a medical cannabis bill in 2021, and it was introduced at the House in a print hearing, and it needed a certain amount of people to concur with it to bring it out of committee, and I was one person short on that. But that was going to be the most restrictive medical cannabis bill in the nation. I even had people who wanted looser regulations, who wanted marijuana into the state. They hated my bill because it was so restrictive and so penalizing if anybody violated it, that it would have been the most strict bill. And I still couldn't get enough traction on it. But
what made it so restrictive?
Like what you could possess, what the quantities were. They were less than even our state. Like, we have a 3-ounce minimum for a misdemeanor. It was less than that. It was.
What happens if I roll around with like 2 ounces? What happens?
In the state?
Yeah.
Right now?
Yeah.
And you get caught with possession?
Yeah.
Well, you would be cited for it. It would be confiscated, and then you would go to a judge or trial, or however they want to do that. Right now, under the current law, not the law that they're wanting to add another $300 fine minimum for that, which would be the only fine for a misdemeanor as a minimum out of every crime in Idaho.
Gotcha.
Which to me is ridiculous, starting at that. But there's a $0 to $1,000 fine option. There's up to 1 year in jail. There's 1 year probation and community service as much as the judge sees fit. In Ada County, it's really common for somebody to get for a possession, and that could even be one gummy in your pocket. You're in possession of it. If you're cited for it, you're facing all of that. But commonalities that were testified for were by the defense attorneys were the kind of the norm in Ada County, and it's not everywhere, but the norm in Ada County is 100 hours community service, sometimes no fine, sometimes a fine, sometimes a sentence suspended, so you get like a 6-month suspended sentence, and then 12 months probation. So you violate anything, that 6-month suspension or suspended sentence could be invoked if you violate your probation. And then let's say they want to do a fine of $300. So all of that, even if they take the $300 fine away and made it $100 or whatever, I'm certain that most people would rather pay $100 or a $300 fine than do 100 hours community service, get stuck on 12 months probation, and a 6-month suspended sentence, or whatever the judge deems necessary to basically reel back that person. But it should be judicial discretion. But that's what you face just for your first time possession here in Idaho.
Gotcha. And so again, with your perspective, what would the distribution, what would the quantity be? Like, would we have dispensaries within the state, or would the burden be on somebody traveling outside the state? Like, how would that work?
Well, I think Idaho could even go to a just possession. Like, if for people with serious illnesses and serious pain, and they could decide what that would be, like how far they want to spread that out or how tight they want to reel that in. But there should be folks who are allowed to possess it and use it. And we have, except for Wyoming, we are bordered by either medical or recreational states. Everyone's within 2 hours of a dispensary, more or less, at least 80-90% of the population. So you could even go get it, bring it back. And if you're given like basically permission to be in possession of it, not use it, you can't use it in public. That would be an absolute no.
Sure.
So under no circumstances could you be out and about using it or even displaying it, but you could transport it and be in possession of it and then use it responsibly for your medicinal purposes in your private residence or somewhere out of the public eye, whatever they would want to do. And if, like in my case, let's say I was allowed to have that, but they said I could have absolutely no, because most of the folks don't want to see just the smokable flower form of cannabis
Sure.
use. But there are benefits to that. I don't agree with that, but whatever Idaho would decide and say, look, you can have edibles, you can have THC with CBD, but it can't be any stronger than this. It can't be any stronger than that. You can't have more than whatever,
X,
like
X
30
quantity.
gummies or something
whatever.
like that, enough for a 30-day supply, 1 gummy a day, whatever they wanted to say. But that would prevent those with the serious medical issues and serious illnesses, serious pain levels for certain situations, that would prevent them from being criminals when all they're doing is trying to get some care. And they don't want to take opioids because I have a Narcan bottle if I want to take opioids that I have to let my wife, she knows where it's at. Actually, I have 2, so I got to have one in one spot, one another if I want. But if I take a certain amount of my opioids, I have to let her know because my lower dosage, I really don't have that issue. But if I'm in more pain and I have to take like my morphine stuff, then I have to hand her Narcan. Well, I would rather definitely eat an edible, which has no chance of an overdose for me. And I don't know anybody that's overdosed on marijuana, especially just edibles or something. Now,
Sure.
they might eat too many and then think they're having an issue, but it turns out you just wait 2 hours, 3 hours, and it's over. But
What with that kind of structure? So essentially, okay, look, it's legal to possess it. We don't have dispensaries here. Got it. And then let's say it's at max 2 hours to a dispensary and back. But the nature of the dispensaries, it's not like the nature of CVS where you're like, hey, give me 60 pills of Vicodin or something like that. Or like my doctor prescribed me 60 pills. And they're like, okay, they count it out very carefully. They have a record, the whole bit. They hand you your 60 pills. And you can't show back up the next day and say, hey, can I get those 60 pills again? And they're like, no. You filled your, thing. For people that would potentially be able to have medicinal, I've never seen that level of scrutiny in a dispensary, and I haven't been to many, but I have been to a couple. And so if I'm an enterprising individual, I'm like, okay, I'm in the one spot of the state that's 2.5 hours away from a dispensary, and there are people here that want this medication. So I can just drive nonstop back and forth. Maybe I do 1 trip a day or 2 trips a day, whatever it is, back and forth. I grab 30 edibles and come back legally. If I get stopped, it's no problem. I have a card, and then I go and sell these at a premium to people that don't want to make the 2.5 hour drive. And I can do this nonstop because there's no actual check or balance of how many times I'm getting those 30 pills. I'm not saying this is great. Like, I don't have time to do that. Let me be clear. I'm not like trying to iron out a business model, but I could see people, attempting to do that. And especially because we're not tracking interstate commerce of that. If you have the medicinal card that allows you to possess, then it's like, great, I just have to go pick it up, bring it back here. And, I have this card that allows me to have this. Like, how would we stop people from doing that? Because that does not, then we just get into dealing, like just straight up drug dealing.
yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's impossible to not have that happen in those circumstances, because if we did have dispensaries here in Idaho, then we can track what comes in and out, who gets it. Because if you have a state medical card and you, like in Oregon or something, and you go in there, they know you were there. And another dispensary, you can't just go to the next dispensary and get more, and the next dispensary and get more. Out-of-staters, I don't know how it works, because I have been to a couple dispensaries, but I've only got what I wanted, and that's when I was in other states for long periods of time. I don't go over to Ontario and bring it back into Idaho, but I have tried it, and I know how it works for me. But I don't know what's to stop everybody from doing whatever. It could be up to coordinating with like law enforcement, the legislators, and other folks too, on how could we make that happen for the sake of these people with like going through chemotherapy who are hurting really bad. Um, but if you're in possession of too much, then you're going to get in trouble for that. There would be a limit.
Sure.
In my bill, if you so much as gave even an edible to your spouse and you got caught doing that, you would lose your card for life. That's if it was here in Idaho. That's why it was so restrictive. But I would be, if people understand the law and they're given, because it's not just like you can do it if you have the issue. Someone here in the state would have to say, you have to go to them with the doctor's recommendation, and then they could give you basically a possession up to certain amounts without getting in trouble. And they could say what those amounts are based on what the doctor says. A doctor could say, you can only have CBD oil with this much THC. I don't think anything else works for you. And that would have prevent somebody from getting edibles or from getting whatever other form that anybody's worried about.
Is there a system, a dispensary system in place in the United States that has that, where you show up like a CVS and you're like, I need this THC oil or this CBD oil, and like, please fulfill this prescription. And they're like, okay, that's all you get. Like, here we go. And by the way, I checked this box. Yeah. You take your thing. Like, we call in for the insurance. Like, is there, because I've been thinking about this, especially since you and I got connected, which is, okay, why is it you can get the opioids? And it comes down to the idea of like it's treated differently. Like if Bayer came out with like a THC pill,
yeah,
little white thing with like a T on it or something, I don't know. And they're like, these are 10 milligrams. And like the doctor's like, okay, go fulfill this prescription. And you go to the dispensary at CVS and he's like, okay, you get like 100 of these 10 milligrams with a T on it. And like, here you go. This is your bottle. You know, it's supposed to last you X number of weeks or something like that. There's like, okay, that seems really sterilized, controlled, and not like really a problem. Like, I don't know anything about it, but I know it's like, okay, if we can get the opioids and Vicodin and things like that, then in this manner, the white bottle with the cotton on top, it probably makes sense to get, something else. And again, I'm not a pharmacist. I don't know any of the studies of efficacy, but it never seems that way. It's always like, here's the strawberry gummy,
yeah.
Or like, here's this plant that you burn and or like, here's a vape, or a hash oil. I don't know all the different variances, but it's never as sterilized and cut and dry as like, okay, here's the little 10 milligram pill with a T on top.
Correct. And that started, so in 1970, the federal government put marijuana as a class 1 controlled substance. Once it's on there, they deemed it in placing that, they deemed it had no medical benefit whatsoever. And that was 1970. Well, since then, there has been medical benefit, but the federal government can't research that when it's a class 1 controlled substance, which means FDA can't do all the research. So there's people researching it, but
Bayer is not coming out with the T pill,
but not for certain things. So in order to do it, I know that somebody, and it's here in Idaho too, but somebody made like a seizure medicine from cannabis oil or marijuana, and it can prevent seizures in children or seizures in people. And that was approved, I believe. I'm not sure if it's approved in Idaho, but I think it was. But and like I said, I could be wrong there, but it is an approved medication. And it's like the only one I know of that's marijuana based. And some pharmaceutical company developed that. And I heard it's like $13,000 a dose. So they did it for profit.
Well, they do them all.
They do them all for profit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. The medicine I'm on is like $8,000+ a month. So just for my cancer inhibitor drugs. And that's just one of my drugs. Does insurance cover that? Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Thank God, man.
But there's reason people's premiums are high because medication costs so much.
Gosh, man, how rough.
I think I've spent, like insurance wise, more on pharmaceuticals than my surgeries. And one of my surgeries was over $400,000 just to keep me alive because I spent a month in the hospital aftercare too. But no, so with all that, the only way you can get something in a pharmacy if it's FDA approved medication. So that means they did all the research, they did all the testing, and they used from sources or synthetics or whatever they did to make it. And now they've got trials and whatever, but they're not doing that with marijuana. And that's because it's still sitting on the class 1 controlled substance. And there's been stuff to lift that off there. Congress has passed bills to legalize it, or not passed bills. They've done bills, and sometimes it passes the House or the Senate for certain things with marijuana, but it's never became into law.
And that's essentially to say, hey, class one, like let's remove it from the class one, and at least we're not saying legalize it completely federally, but remove it from class one. That would essentially liberate the capacity to have like double blind, scientific studies and things of that nature. Because one of the objections that I hear frequently is, there are no conclusive medical studies that say this is safe or the efficacy or whatever it might be. But as long as it remains class one, there will never be those things. It's not that it wouldn't pass it or that it's not capable of producing some body of work that would justify it. It's that we're not allowed to engage in that research or pursuit of that work to justify it.
Yeah, and that's my understanding too.
Gotcha.
And you knock it down to like a class 3, and then they can start testing it, and they can start getting like the big companies involved to research it. Now, I don't know. Like I said, I think you got to patent it, make it in some sort of like ingestible pill form or something like that, and get the rights to it to make money off of it. Because a pharmaceutical company, I can't see them ever going around and just saying, hey, it turns out just smoking regular marijuana will benefit this, this, and this, and this, because they won't profit from it. That's just how I see it. I don't see major pharmaceutical companies getting involved with testing and research unless they know they can personally profit from it.
Well, I think that would also be crazy for them to make that statement, just because the bottom line, it's like, well, what are you smoking? Right? Like, who are you getting it from? Is it legal? Is it like, you have to say like, hey, ketchup on your French fries probably won't hurt you. Okay, because we understand what ketchup means, right? And we haven't understood like, okay, we got Heinz, we got, whatever. But ketchup is like a universally understood substance. To say, hey, it's not bad to smoke pot or marijuana when you have no universality to the source, the potency, the plant, like all of these things, that it would be a wild thing to say like, oh yeah, it's fine. So yeah, and maybe they wouldn't profit from it either, but it would also be, that statement would be dead on arrival, because it's like, well, like, what are you even talking about? Right. Yeah. One other problem that I've heard around this argument is that as the liberalization of the medical system around this started being born and really propagating throughout the country, the people that were most likely to gain medicinal marijuana cards were males between the age of 18 and 30. So it's kind of like, yeah, your case, obviously, it sounds like it's something that is beneficial to you. And we have this tangential, consideration where people are able to gain access to it, that, it's like, why are the 18 to 30-year-old males the ones that are most in pain? And I'm not saying none of them had cancer and stuff, but to say that, hey, look, that's the picture of pain and suffering, an 18 to 30-year-old male. I just don't think that's reality.
Yeah. And I haven't seen that exactly the way you're saying. Now, when I saw like stuff for when it became medical, a lot of folks, I think it was like 50 to 65 and then 65 plus, that increased quite a bit.
I'm sure.
Those folks were actually using it for medical purposes. On recreational states, the numbers are more balanced, I think, from what I've saw, whereas anybody 21 and older now can get it if they want it. I kind of find it funny on the data that says in states where it has become legal, marijuana use went up 24%. Or whatever in the state. It's like, well, yeah, it's legal now. There's nobody that's worried about getting, arrested or cited or fined or jail time for low-level possession. So of course it's going to go up. But in the stuff I saw, there's all ages of folks using it. A lot of the folks I know, they don't like smoking it, so they get the edibles or they get the drops or they get whatever else. But when you get it from a dispensary instead of from someone on the street, you're at least knowing exactly what's in it, what the THC level is, what the CBD level is, the potency, whether it's 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams of THC or whatever, it has this much CBD. That to me is the safe way to obtain it. Obtaining it from someone on the street, that's not a safe way to obtain it.
How would people know, right? Like, say it comes to pass that it's legal to possess it, and you have an enterprising individual who's like, hey, I'm just going to go to Oregon, 2.5 hours, and I get sick of doing like the 5-hour pull. I'm like, I don't want to drive back and forth 5 hours to just get this stuff because this is my product. Now it's legal to possess it. So if I get caught like engaging in the public with it, no problem. But man, if I could just grow some of my own at home, then my commute is 0 minutes because I'm leaving my house with the product. And once I leave that, so like because when I've spoken with law enforcement agents, over the years that dealt with the liberalization in states like California, they're like, dude, it was just a train wreck, because then all of a sudden people were comfortable with the idea of you possessing it, and the transfer of it from one person to the next became fine. But we also had this black market product that sprung out of nowhere. And you can't tell what the black market product, like if you look at two edibles, you don't know which one was purchased legally and to some degree of regulation within the dispensary, or just this gummy that somebody made at their house. And because you can't do that, nobody knew what they were getting. And that led to a rash of problems with, things that were laced with horrible drugs like fentanyl and other things. So like, how would we navigate that?
Well, I think that stuff's probably already going on here. Being that nobody wants to get caught going across state lines and coming back with it or anything, because the further you go away and the further you come back with possession before you can get to wherever your safe place of residence or wherever you're going to be, where you don't have to worry about any of that. But if you're growing, like people, I'm going to guess they're growing their own. I'm guessing. I don't know anybody in Idaho who's growing their own marijuana, but I don't know of everybody who's just going across state line and getting it. Now, one of the things that I completely agree with is we do need to protect people under 21 from even having access to it. And that's because their brains are still developing. I agree with that science. The keeping it out of their hands, they're probably the ones who are finding the easier access with those folks who are just getting it. And I don't even think they're getting it in Ontario, maybe somewhere, but because the levels you can buy would be a felony over here, by the way, which you can obtain in any of the surrounding ones if you wanted to max yourself out on, especially on edibles, because we're just weight-based fines here. Like you can buy up to a pound, I think, of solids in Oregon.
Oh my God, a pound?
Yeah, but that's still less than the potency of 3 ounces of marijuana, but in the solid-based form. So imagine like a brick pack of gum, like bubble gum. Remember those? Like you got like 6 or 7 pieces of gum in that pack.
Dude, the watermelon was so lit.
Those weigh over 1.5 ounces.
Yeah.
So, like 10 little gummies are like 1.4 ounces. So if you buy 2 packs of gummies and then maybe a little bottle of CBD oil with some THC, you've exceeded that 3-ounce rule. And now that's a felony coming across the state line. So it doesn't take much quantity to get you to the felony level. But
if I'm an 18-year-old right now in the state of Idaho, or 17-year-old or 16-year-old, and I'm trying to gain access to marijuana, I have a certain level of suspicion immediately because I know it's illegal, right? I'm already engaging in illegal commerce. And so I have a certain level of discrimination against, that course of action. And like I may engage in it, I may not, but I know it's not a good idea just from a legal standpoint. If things became legal to possess and somebody's like, no, I just went over the border and picked this up, it's not even a big deal, I have a lower degree of discrimination against that transaction because I'm like, well, it's legal for this guy. He probably got it legal. I mean, when you say, hey, we got to keep it out of the hands of people that are under 21, I get really concerned with it. Like, well, they're going to have access to it more so if it's legal to just walk around with it, right? Right now, we know it's illegal to walk around with it.
If it was for what I'm saying is you have to be medically authorized to have it.
No, I know, but we're talking about people that are like not great people, bad actors, which are like, hey, all I get, like, I'm a loser, which is not far from the truth in reality. I'm a loser. I am going to do whatever I have to do to get my medicinal marijuana card. I don't have gainful employment. I'm not getting gainful employment, but what I can do is get in my car and like haul ass across the border and come back all day, every day, because I don't have to do anything. And I'm going to just sell to underage people and not just, well-intentioned people like yourself who might have medical considerations. And I would get a premium by doing that, right? Because now you don't have to help, but I'm going to actually target like the high school kids. Now, mind you, I can walk around with this, so it's really easy for me to do. The only thing I have to be careful of is that like the transfer happens out of the sight of other people, because I can walk around with it all day long, every day. And I just have to the transaction just has to be out of sight. And then I'm like free to go and just keep going back, right? Like that system seems to it would be my expectation that would seem to increase minor possession of this stuff.
Um,
And I don't know because
so
I'm an idiot.
so
But
there's the deterrent for that is, so even if I went and got some and I just gave it to my wife, which I wouldn't do that, but
sure.
that's distribution in the state of Idaho. If it's not for personal use
Yeah,
and I have it and I give
Oh,
it,
it's
that's
totally illegal.
It's
Right.
totally illegal. It's a felony. It's distribution. It comes with a minimum sentence right then. The distribution of marijuana in this state is a minimum sentence, not a minimum fine, a minimum sentence. Then quantities up to certain weights. I mean, you're looking at huge prison time for that. That's why I wouldn't even share a gummy if I had it and I
Sure.
was allowed to have it, because now I'm distributing it. Because if that person does get sick or feels nauseous or goes and does
Right,
something
right, right.
stupid,
Oh, it's terrible.
or these kids, like they did that, like you were saying, and they get behind the wheel of a car, or they get home to their mom or dad and they're in trouble now. Where did you get it? I would hope that would actually come to light, because nobody should be doing that if they're allowed to have it. Now, I'm not saying somebody won't, because there's no way to control it with
Right.
that level, but to me, if you even were to so much as share a gummy, that's if you're authorized a certain amount of medical cannabis in this state, and you get caught even sharing one or giving it away to somebody or whatever, we should make it to where now you're revoked for life. You've made one violation, we revoke it for life. If I know Idaho wants to control it, if it does come in, a lot of people don't want it to come in, and a lot of people do want it to come in. They want to have access, especially for when your family member is ailing in a certain way that's really bad.
Right.
They want to help at any cost. And I would have not been able to go. So if I asked my wife, go get this for me while I'm on chemotherapy, she might do it. If she sees like I'm about to die, now I'm putting her at risk, because if she comes back and gives it to me, she's distributing. Now she goes to jail for a year, minimum sentence. So it's not like the front end solution, but there might be better options. I don't know the best way to control every single thing
Sure,
with this. I'm just like, I know what I would do. And if I had access to it, I would not abuse it. I would use it for me, because I wouldn't want to risk losing that option and having my only option be opioids again. Or I'd have to do a year in jail if I did something wrong.
Sure. Yeah. Jeremy, I appreciate your perspective. This, again, it's a more unique one. You're not advocating for like dispensaries on every corner. I mean, when we have really controlled, we have very tight state control of even things like alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Like we have state-run liquor stores.
We have the strictest laws in the country, for the most part,
Yeah.
for almost everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So the bottom line is, you personally find value in this, and I know other people who have found value in it as well. But how do we as a state navigate the best way to figure out, okay, is it a value that we want to change things to attain? And if the answer is yes, how do we achieve that value while minimizing the tangential pitfalls? And like, that's a really tricky question to answer.
and I might not answer it the way you're saying, or what, because like I said, I don't even know, but I hear stories of tragedies from people who have experienced, like people killed in alcohol related crashes, or they were under the influence of drugs, or died from fentanyl overdoses or anything. And that's all tragic. If we want to prevent those two, the only way to prevent DUI is to stop selling alcohol in the state. And that still won't prevent it, but it would reduce it if we don't have access to it. But honestly, alcohol, I was told like we control alcohol really well here in Idaho, which we do, but I can go get it on my way home. There's 2 places I can go get hard alcohol. There's no limit on how much I can get, from my knowledge. As long as I can afford to buy it, I could buy 77 bottles of alcohol.
Right.
And just go home. So I would say there's certain times you can't buy alcohol, but for the most part, alcohol is really easy to obtain here in Idaho. So I don't think it's very strict, but it is stricter than a lot of states, because a lot of states you can just go into a gas station and buy rum off the shelf, where you can't do that here. For the folks that are like, like I said, in my situation, I do get the, hey, we feel for you, Jeremy. We do. And I've been told by representatives who do not support medical cannabis, who have said, somebody like you should be able to do whatever they want. And I was like, that's what I'm asking for,
Ah.
but
You're like, I agree.
I agree. And that's not whatever I want, but in this case, like, to consume a marijuana product responsibly that will help my situation, I should be able to do that. And these are the folks that don't support like passing it from the state, and they're like, well, I don't want the kids to get it, or I've seen marijuana cause problems with family relationships. I've seen drugs and alcohol destroy families. Well, that's true. That does happen. And then they say, well, if we can prevent one of these or one of these or one of these by keeping marijuana off legalization, then it's worth it. But I said, if you can help 17,000 Idahoans who have extreme chronic pain, extreme medical issues where marijuana could be beneficial, where you can help the folks going through chemotherapy, and not everybody's going to want to use it, but give them the right to try, give them the right to see if it works without facing jail time, then we've helped 17,000 hurting, ailing, sick, critically ill Idahoans try something that works for them, and maybe like only 13,000 help. But isn't that also worth it? Because if we can prevent one alcohol fatality by doing something a little more strict than what we're doing now, what about helping all these people in agony and pain and going through these life scary decisions? And when they find out, you got to take opioids. Well, can I try cannabis? No, you can't. No, absolutely not. We'll put you in jail. We'll give you a $300 fine. We're going to give you probation. We're going to make you do 100 hours of community service. Imagine a chemo patient having to do 100 hours community service. So I just don't see I see their side of it when they say it, but it's like they don't see my side. And it's not for me. I'm afraid I'm going to be dead by the time this does anything. It's for the next person. It's for the folks who there's benefit in other states. Like I said, there's 39 states with medical marijuana legalized. All but 2 states allow for a certain portion of CBD with THC. Idaho has 0 THC tolerance, so you can't have 0.00001 when other states you can have 0.3 or 0.03 or whatever it is, sure. And these other states, including Texas, but we can't have it here. So we can't even have it at the federal level. Our laws are so strict. And just yesterday I saw that Idaho per capita incarcerates more women than any other state. And 60% of the women incarcerated are in there for drug crimes. And like 60%-ish of those are for possession. So,
but we're not talking marijuana.
Well, I don't know. They just said for drug possession.
Well, I can tell you for sure in Ada County Jail, we don't have people sitting in there for like marijuana possession.
I've heard there's over 400 people in Idaho sitting in jails for marijuana possession.
Well, I said Ada County. And I get that stat from Sheriff Clifford.
Okay.
And again, I should not speak for Sheriff Clifford, but I have spoken with him quite a bit, because when they were doing the jail expansion, he came on to explain like, okay, this is what we need. And people were like, well, you're just expanding the jail for, these low level drug offenses. He's like, no. We don't have anybody sitting in Ada County Jail right now for like marijuana possession.
Okay. What about marijuana possession where they were told they had to do probation and community service and pay fines? They failed to do that, so they didn't meet the rules of their probation, and then were arrested on the warrant, and then they're in jail. That would be still, in my mind, for marijuana possession, even though it's like they're in jail for violating probation.
Let's do this.
So
I should not speak, because when Sheriff Clifford and I spoke, it was about probably like a year or plus ago, because it was when he was talking about expanding there. So maybe today, maybe you are right. Maybe there are people sitting in Ada County Jail right now today that are there on marijuana possession. It's possible, but we also have other real problems with like fentanyl and methamphetamines and things like this. So when we say, hey, we have 60% of, women, they're there for possession of drugs. It's like, okay, but there are a lot of serious drugs that I don't think we should say this is predominantly or even some significant portion from marijuana.
Yeah, I agree. But it would be nice to know the breakdown, because when they generalize it, we have no way of knowing. We just can perceive. So when they say, It's possession. It could be possession of fentanyl. It could be
Right.
possession of cocaine. It could be possession of heroin. But we don't know. But we are the highest incarcerated state for women. We are the highest, like I think, fourth highest in men. So our laws do keep, I think it's 1 out of every 135 Idahoans are serving time in jail. But now with House Bill 7 that's being introduced, they want to add a minimum $300 fine for anyone caught with possession, including whether or not you're going for chemotherapy or whatever. They want to make the judge, force the judge that if this comes before them and they're guilty of that possession, that they have to fine a $300 fine. Now, Rep. Skog introduced this with a story that said he heard from a judge a while back that said another judge was giving a $2.50 fine for possession of marijuana. And that's all we heard publicly until we went to testimony, and then we testified. And then I even asked at testimony, I was like, I'd like to know why the judge did that. And it was read after the fact to each other that that judge, he did give a $2.50 fine, but it was for a minor amount of marijuana. But he gave 100 hours community service, 6 months in jail, suspended, but he had to serve 2 nights in jail, and 12 months probation. And 100, like I said, I think it said 100 hours.
So the financial penalty was the lesser of the.
Yeah. So the judge uses the discretion based on that circumstance. Maybe that person couldn't afford to pay big fines or something, but would benefit more from 100 hours community service as a lesson learned.
Yeah.
But then he said in testimony on the floor that if a cop pulls me over, or I should say police officer, but if a police officer pulls me over and I have in my possession, let's say, a bag of 5 gummies or something like that, so I'm in possession of marijuana below the 3-ounce limit, he says that that officer then has the discretion whether or not to cite me for that. And I find that odd. Like, are officers really going to say, well, you're going through cancer treatment, so I'm not even going to cite you, just have a fun day. I can't risk that. And then he says, now prosecutors then have the discretion after hearing the case whether or not they even want to move forward with it. And okay, but now the judges don't have the discretion to have a low fine and a high amount of community service or something. We're taking that away from judges. And like I said, there's no like domestic abuse. As long as the person being abused doesn't need immediate medical attention, it's a misdemeanor, no minimum fine. There's all kinds of cases like that that are misdemeanors that are more violent, more harmful.
Sure, without
but even if this passes, if you were to smoke marijuana and drive and then get pulled over, not hurt anybody, but get pulled over, and they realize you're impaired and you're intoxicated with a controlled substance of marijuana, there's no minimum fine. Now, I'm not saying that the judge is more likely, I would trust that judge or any judge in the state of Idaho will be harsh on that person, probably fine them big, probably suspend their license, probably give them probation, probably even maybe give them some jail time. I don't know, not a lot, usually first offense stuff for that, but that is endangering people versus possession. I don't know why we're making it harder for the crime of possession is worse than the crime of use and misuse and putting people harm. So that's one of my other things too.
Well, listen, Jeremy, I appreciate you coming in. I do need to cut you short. I apologize, but let's keep connecting on this because I do appreciate you bringing your perspective. Again, I think it's an important one. We should flush this out, right? Like we should have the best medical care and best options, being that we live in the United States. And I think we should also have the best protective mechanisms for our youth. So again, thank you for sharing your perspective. Thank you for speaking up for the people that feel that they're not being represented well or served well by our medical community. I think you're definitely not in the minority, or excuse me, you're not alone in that one. So again, let's do it again.
All right. Appreciate your time.